This is Join Us in France, episode 17. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
Yes.
On today's show, we'll be talking about food in France, what people eat in general, regional foods, cliches about French food, issues with special diets, and that's really important to talk about, and how food attitudes are changing in France. We're very, very happy that we have received quite a few more reviews for the podcast on iTunes. I really want to thank those who went ahead and wrote for us, and thank you for showing us some love. Tony's French girl from the US says, highly recommended, 5 stars. I've just discovered this podcast and I've listened to several episodes in a row. Oh, I love that. That's exactly what I do with podcasts that I like.
Thank you, Tony.
Yes. It's entertaining, educational, makes one want to hop on a plane and experience for oneself all the treasures and delights France has to offer. I hope there will be many, many more episodes to come. Thank you so much, Tony. Taylor says, hi, Elise and Annie, loving the podcast. I'm loving each episode you guys are putting out. Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you, Taylor.
And then we have, let's see, what's the name of this person? I don't see a name. It's PBNJ99. Excellent way to prepare for a visit. 5-star rating. What a delight to find this podcast as we prepare to travel to France. Extremely helpful to listen to the history, the charm, the architecture, and the fun of being in Paris. Highly recommend it. Thank you very much, PBNJ. Oh, PBNJ. Duh.
PB&J.
Yeah, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Right?
They won't find that in France.
That's right. Well, yes, I think we're right in the food here.
I think we're right into food right away. That was perfect.
Deputy R37 says, 5 stars also. Great information, a lot of great information on where to go, what to see, and travel tips. Great for planning a trip or just learning more about France. Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you, and good traveling.
Yes, Mary DMD of the US also says, excellent, 5 stars. C'est magnifique. I'm Francophone and Francophile, and I find these podcasts to be so relevant for traveling. I have lived and traveled in France extensively, and I find myself learning things I did not know before. Well, that's nice.
That is nice.
Thank you so much for this wonderfully informative show. Mary, I don't want to, Painter? Paynter. Would you say Painter?
That would be Painter.
Lovely. Okay, thank you so much. Please continue to share the show with friends. Now, we're not asking you to spam anyone, obviously. We just want you to share if you think your friends and family would be interested in this. And if they're not, they're not. That's okay. Okay, so another thing, before I let Elise talk for a change. Is that I'm going to start doing something. I'm going to provide full transcripts of the show for a few episodes. I'm just trying it. It takes a lot of time. I just want to see if it will make it easier to find us in Google, you see. And I may continue doing this. I may not. We're just trying it for a while. So you'll see that the format of the posts on the website are going to change a little bit, but it won't change anything for you. We'll still be releasing a show every Saturday morning. All right, don't worry if you can't take notes. You'll find our show notes and full transcript now on joinusinfrance.com / and the number 17.
17.
Okay, thank you. And Elise, let's have a little music and then we'll start talking about food, and hopefully it won't make us fat.
And it will make us hungry, though, I think. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Elise.
Ready to go?
Ready to eat.
Ready to eat. Oh, boy. Oh, this is going to be hard because by the time we're done, you're going to be chewing on your fingers. I can tell already.
Well, I have a nice big cup of coffee.
You have a nice big cup of coffee.
Very un-French, by the way.
Well, here we go. We're going to have another one of these talk-offs like we did when it came to politeness.
Yeah.
You're the Frenchie who's not French, and I'm the American who's very French. So here we go. Okay, my first thing is I have a question for you, okay?
Okay.
I want you to think, now, of course, you are someone who was born in France and has lived for a long time in the States, and your taste in food tends to be very hybrid, okay?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, what do you, Annie, associate as foods that go with France?
Foods that go with France.
Yeah, if I say to you, we're going to have French food, what is it that you think of?
Oh, I think of good old family kind of traditional dishes, like more of the regional dishes, cassoulet, choucroute, daube, these sorts of things.
So you're actually talking, it's interesting because we'll talk about that later on. You're talking about really specialty dishes that come out of different regions of France.
Yes.
So for you, talking about French food still is talking about regional differences.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
In a way, yeah.
Okay. What do you think then? Other people who have never been to France, what do you think they associate with France as food?
Oh, probably they think of wine and bread and cheese.
Wine and bread and cheese.
Probably. I don't know. I think my American friends, that's something that they bring up first,
right.
you know.
Well, that's more like the cliche
And the
of the
pastries.
guy. And the pastries. Pastries, maybe not. I'm not even sure. But I think even the cliche image of the guy with the beret and he's holding a baguette in his hand and he's got a camembert or a piece of cheese in the other, and obviously there's a bottle of wine somewhere in the picture. Obviously. So, okay. So that's question number 2. Mm-hmm. Now, if I asked you, what do you think is the typical percentage of a family's budget per month for food in France, what would you answer?
I think it's pretty high. Just based on the prices I see at the grocery stores, maybe it's 30% of their monthly budget.
That's pretty good. Yes, it is. It's actually somewhere between 30 and 35%.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we eat pretty well, and it's not cheap.
It's not cheap. Yeah. And, of course, what that tells us is that unlike in some other countries and some other cultures, food is very important.
Yes.
So here we go. We're going to talk a little bit about food and France.
Mm-hmm.
First thing I want to do is just mention to people, because I know that most people have heard of the term continental breakfast.
Sure.
If you've been to any kind of hotel, even in the States or anywhere, you basically know, and a lot of people will grumble when they hear that, because what's a continental breakfast? Well, a continental breakfast is, of course, typical of what used to be the typical breakfast in France. And that means that it's very small. There's not a lot of food. It's basically a breakfast that does not have a lot of protein.
Correct,
so,
if any.
If any, right? Yeah. So you will have a hot drink. Now, for children, it tends to be hot chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
For adults, it tends to be either coffee, big bowl of black coffee, or café au lait, coffee with milk.
Yeah.
And in the recent past, it has started to happen. Really, it's turning into a big fad that people are starting to drink a lot of tea, which is very surprising, but it is true. And then you have either toast, what they call pain grillé, right?
Yeah.
Or this strange thing that really doesn't exist in the United States that the French called the biscotte, right? Which I actually love, So she's laughing, and I love them. I told you, you're not French anymore. I'm the one who's French, I find bread in the morning really heavy to eat, because even if it's grilled, if it's put through a toaster or whatever, it's a lot. And of course, the typical French breakfast until recent times was some hot drink and then bread and butter and jam.
Which is what I have.
Which is what you have.
Yep.
And then, of course, it has become a habit, more or less. And this is probably in the last 20, 25 years for people to have some orange juice or something like that. There's much, much more juice consumed as a morning beverage than it used to be.
Yes.
But basically, unless you add one other thing, that is basically your continental breakfast. Now, if you're out in a hotel, they always usually give you either a croissant or something else, which of course is one of the things that everyone associates with France, right?
Yes, and they're lovely.
And they're lovely, except that the truth is, and you and I both know that, is that most French people don't have a croissant every morning for breakfast, or they would turn into blimps.
Yeah, it's full of butter.
It's filled with butter.
Also, with the amount of butter I put on my toast, sometimes I wonder.
There you go. But of course, it's considered to be the Sunday morning thing to do.
Exactly.
To go to the bakery and get fresh croissant, or what they call pain au chocolat, which is a kind of croissant dough, but it's got a little sliver of chocolate on the inside.
Yeah.
And of course, that it's the special thing that people do. In the States, might be a brunch, it might be pancakes. Here, it's going to the bakery and getting those kinds of things on Sunday morning.
Right. And you also, there's two others that you can get. There's pain au lait.
Pain au lait.
Which is, or brioche.
Or brioche, which is my favorite.
Yeah. Or you can also get pain au raisin.
Yes, which is a snail.
Yeah, it's like a rolled up thing of dough with kind of
it's got a little bit of
raisins,
custard and raisins.
Yeah, and it's lovely.
Depending on where you come from in the States, it's where I come from. It's called a snail because it's in the form of a snail. Yeah.
It's in the form of a snail.
It's in the form of a snail.
Yeah, those are really good. They're usually a little bit more expensive because they're bigger.
They're a little bit bigger, and they depend. And of course, if you're someone like me, I judge places in the world by how good the breads and the pastries are. So you want to know about where to get good ones, just ask me, really, It's amazing I don't weigh 5,000 pounds, actually,
No, you don't.
No, I don't. Not yet. Not anyway. So, of course, that is really what is a classical, typical breakfast that everyone calls a continental breakfast. And now, things have changed a little bit. And, yes, to go back to the biscuit, which makes you laugh so hysterically. Yes. I love them because they're crunchy. They're light. Now, what is a biscuit? Well, it actually comes from the Italian word biscotti. And what it is now, of course, they're made specifically, and you get them in packages. They're not cookies. They're not sweet. They are either made with whole wheat flour or regular flour, and you have actually several different kinds. But they are a kind of bread that is bread that's been sliced and rebaked. So it is crunchy and very, very light. And a lot of people have that in the morning with a little bit of butter or jam. And I actually like that in the morning.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
I feel so
virtuous.
I associate that with older people on a diet.
Oh, no. I mean, you know what you're making me think of? Zwieback, which is something I used to eat when I was a kid, when I would get sick in the States, which is also like that. It's very light and fluffy, but actually,
Zwieback?
Yeah, it's called Zwieback, yeah.
How do you spell that? I've never heard that word.
Oh, God, Zwieback, Zweiback, yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, look that one up. But I happen to think that biscuits are wonderful, and there you get all kinds. You can get them organic, you can get them whole wheat, you can get them with what they call country style. I love them. I really do.
It's a dried up bread, pretty much.
Oh God, listen to her. Don't listen to her. Just they're really, really good. If you don't want to fill yourself up with lots of bread in the morning,
Well, it is bread that they've removed all the humidity
out
of it.
They've removed the humidity, and it's actually
they dried it up.
If you it depends on whether you eat a lot in the morning. Now, what, of course, is not typical in France at all, unless you go to a fancy hotel that has what they call a buffet breakfast, a buffet buffet breakfast, which has lots of things, including cheese and slices of
boiled
ham and boiled eggs and things like that. You will not get a bacon and eggs breakfast. It does not exist in France. What you will get, though, and a lot of people do, and it is something, in fact, that I tend to do a lot in the morning, is have a small yogurt.
Yes.
Because that is a way of getting some of your protein in, and yet it's still light. Basically, what we're saying is that breakfast in France is a light meal. Mm-hmm. It is not a heavy meal. It is not a big meal. Yeah. And a lot of people a lot of adults still do not have anything more than just coffee.
Yes.
And then they go off to work. Now, what does that mean? Well, obviously, what that means is that by 12 o'clock, all of these hordes of people are starving.
Yes. And they get really cranky.
They get very cranky. And especially if you have to go to the post office or the bank or one of these places where they do take off for lunch. You just don't want to go the last few minutes before 12 o'clock because they will snarl at you. You know, it's like, didn't you look at the clock? Didn't you know we're about to close? We have to go to lunch.
This is something that's really important to understand, is that French people are overall pretty skinny compared to North Americans.
They are.
And that's because they only eat enough to hold them over until the next meal.
And they don't eat in between.
They don't
meals.
snack. They don't
do
snack.
not snack.
And
right.
so when it's mealtime, they want to eat.
They want to eat.
They do not want to delay. It's like a pregnant woman. You know, pregnant women have this. I never experienced that before pregnancy, but you get hungry like, I must eat.
You have to eat, right.
Now.
You know?
Right.
And
I think that's how French people feel most of the time, because they have no reserves.
No, well, and even those who do have some reserves, I think there are two things about food and eating in France. And this is that mealtime is very important. And the other thing is that in general, and this is something that is very, very different and sometimes very difficult for tourists and foreigners to adapt to, there are some very, very regular hours for meals.
Yeah.
And in France, lunch is between 12 and 2. Mm-hmm. If you go to Spain and Italy, it is later.
Yes.
And so you have to know that we're not talking about, I don't want to talk today about restaurants and what happens when you go out. If you're in a touristy area, there's always a place you can get something to eat at any time of the day.
Right.
But if you are talking about people's homes and lives, even those people who work in an office, they will have their lunch time between 12 and 2. Now,
that means they're done by 2.
That means they're done by 2. Right. That's right. So there are still people who live in small towns who go home for lunch.
Of course.
And then those who do not, they will, of course, go somewhere and have a lunch. But, of course, I would like to save the changing trends for a little bit later.
Yeah.
But what happens then is that lunch becomes, for a lot of people, and less than before, but still for a lot of people, a very important meal. Mm-hmm. So it is often, not always, a warm meal. Mm-hmm. But it is a meal that is a meal where you will have your first significant amount of protein for the day, since you usually don't have it in the morning.
Yep.
And then when you're done with lunch, whatever you're doing, whether you go back to work, whether you go back to school, whether you're a housewife at home, you basically go on with your afternoon activities. You might stop for a tea or coffee at around 4, between 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. Notice the hours. These are much later than, of course, in the States. And then you have dinner with the family. Everyone's sitting around the table together. This is absolutely essential in France. It's considered to be a basic part of creating a connecting feeling between people.
We shock people, visitors, even my family, when they come over, because our dinner is often around the coffee table, and there's just 3 of us. So we eat around the coffee table, and we watch a funny show. We like to watch something funny. And my family's like, what? You don't set the table every night? Whatever.
And you don't talk to each other? You watch something on the screen?
Well, we talk to each other all the time. It's just that we just like to relax that way at the end of the day.
And that is
but
something...
it's not very French.
It's not very French. I was just going to say.
Yeah.
It is something, of course, that does happen more and more, but it is definitely something imported from the other side of the ocean. This is not something that is French. But what you get is mealtime in general. Now, of course, in the north of France, where the climate is a little bit different, it can be a little bit earlier. But basically, no one eats dinner before 7:30.
Correct.
And in the summertime, people tend to eat dinner about 9 o'clock.
Yes, later.
Which is still not as late, of course, as in a country like Spain, where I'm not going to talk about it because it's a totally different environment.
Yeah.
But basically, you have dinner time between 7:30 and 9. Most people I know will have dinner between 7:30 and 8, beginning the meal.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because, of course, that is why very often people will have a tea or coffee and maybe a couple of cookies or an apple at 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. But that is also why when people are done eating dinner, they do not snack anymore.
No.
And you don't have anything until the next morning.
Right.
So it's a very different rhythm.
But at the same time, if you go the few occasions where I eat out at a cafeteria or something, you see all these skinny French people, and they have on their tray, they put an appetizer, they put a main dish, they put a dessert, they put sometimes cheese,
Right.
bread, wine. I mean, they do have a big meal.
They have a big meal.
Right.
They do.
But they eat a big meal at lunchtime, at dinner time, and then the rest of the time, no more.
And no more. Right. And it's just...
And it's children. For children, up until children are like 8 or 9 years old, it's perfectly acceptable to send them to school with a snack for middle afternoon.
That's right.
But after that, it's frowned upon.
It's frowned upon because they will get fat. And this is, of course, on some level... Whereas in certain countries that we know very well, it is a serious, real health problem. Here in France, it is almost an obsession in the other way.
Yeah.
You really have to be careful to not have people be obsessed by, I can't eat that, I can't eat that, I can't eat that. But what they do, and it really makes a big difference, is they do not snack in between meals. Mm-hmm. And so you're absolutely right. The meals, particularly the one big meal a day. And now some people still maintain that it's better to do that as your midday meal. Other people prefer, as I do at home with my husband, to have the big meal at night. But basically, nobody eats in between meals.
Right.
Now, I usually have what happens to a lot of people is between 4 and 5, I do get a little hungry. So I try to control that by having tea, which is something I tend to drink a lot all day anyway. Mm-hmm. And then I will have either an apple or I will, have maybe a couple of cookies, but something that is very small because I feel like I'm not supposed to have anything more than that because it ruins your appetite for dinner.
You have certainly internalized this a lot better than I have.
Yes. Well, I've had to, but that's another broadcast we'll have to talk about. Anyway, so that is basically the way people relate to the time of the day for food and what the meals are like. And even though there are some external Anglo influences in the sense that now it's become a little bit more fashionable on Sundays to relax the meal hours and things like that, that is still basically the way people eat in France. People are always asking, well, what do people eat in France? And of course, there's a big difference. And I think everybody knows that or must realize that there's a very big difference between what you will find in your basic restaurant and what people do cook and eat at home.
Right.
And so I think that one of the things that makes a big difference, and I was just talking to someone else just yesterday about this, is that, of course, in France, everywhere, you still have wonderful open-air markets. Yeah. And that is where most people tend, not all the time, but they really, if they can, that is where they will buy their fruits and vegetables.
Yes. Although they are quite a bit more expensive, usually. Well, at least the ones around where I live.
But you know what? If you go into center of town, the big open air market.
Yeah, that one is cheap.
It's cheap.
Yeah, that one
is cheap. And it is really fresh.
I know the one you mean.
Yeah.
But if you, in the suburbs where I live, it's like, whoa, it's pretty expensive.
It's expensive. But again, remember, we're talking about a country where people spend a third of their budget on food. Mm-hmm. And food is literally the most important thing in the sense that in France, to this day, people would still rather spend it on food than on furniture. I mean, this is really culturally an enormous difference.
Yeah.
So, yes, of course, there are lots of supermarkets. There are lots of supermarket chains. Some of them are much better in quality than the others. And some of them are now starting to have huge sections of organic fruits and vegetables and things like that. There is, of course, a price difference, as in every country, between mass-produced food and food that is not.
Right.
And a lot of fruits and vegetables are brought up from Spain, which is not unusual considering that it has a certain climate. So you get a lot of the citrus fruits and things like that come up from Spain, avocados and things like that. But even so, even when people go to a big supermarket, they tend to spend a lot of money on fruits and vegetables and on dairy products.
Yeah.
And there may be some what we would call junk food, but it's not a lot. Mm-hmm. And you will not see piles and piles of junk food in people's wagons when they go shopping. What you will see...
Wagons.
Carts. Wagons. Wagons. What is it? It's a wagon. It's a cart. You push it. It's a wagon. It's very
You are
interesting.
French.
I'm very French. What you really see, and I notice this because I will go to different supermarkets on occasion, and then of course I will, if I can, go to the open air market to get my fruits and vegetables. I will look to see what people buy, and quite honestly, even people who are relatively poor, who don't have a lot of money, you will notice that their carts, their wagons are filled with food that is basically what we could call the essential food groups, and it is not a lot of junk food.
Right.
And of course, one of the biggest food groups that is of major importance in France, much more so than in the States, is dairy products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we eat a lot of dairy. The yogurt aisle in France is to die for.
Is to die for. Not only do you have a zillion kinds of yogurts, but you have all these other things. You know, we have the fromage frais, the little Swiss. I mean, what the French have been able to do in creativity in using milk products is really quite astounding. Mm-hmm. And I can remember years back, my first one or two times going into a big, huge supermarket and looking at this endless long island, you know, and the aisle, and thinking, this is it, and then turning around and another one, the other aisle next door was cheese. This was not the cheese aisle. This was the yogurt and dessert products aisle, and then there was the cheese aisle. It is a major important food group here.
It's like in America, what struck me is how many types of cereal I could find in an American supermarket.
Right.
And then you had 5 types of yogurt, and mostly fat-free yogurt, which honestly, they don't taste good. You know, eat less yogurt, but eat the regular yogurt, not the... I don't know. It doesn't taste that good when it's fat-free.
Don't listen to her. I get really good fat-free yogurt.
So it's not true. Anyway, but when you're in France, even if you're only here for a few days, you should really go visit a supermarket. Maybe you won't find a big one because those are usually in the suburbs. But go to a supermarket, buy some yogurt. You will really enjoy it.
Yes, you will really. And there really are all kinds. There is plain yogurt, and you have plain yogurt. Interestingly enough, I had this experience with a group a few months ago. I took someone into one of the supermarkets, actually in Paris, and it has a very nice section for things like this. And what I realized, because I hadn't been thinking about it, was that in France you have full-fat yogurt and 0%. You do not have something in between. That doesn't exist in France.
Yeah.
So, and then of course you have lots of yogurts that are with different kinds of fruit base.
We actually have, there are some differences, but you have to really look for them. Usually if it's green, it's going to be...
That's milk.
Yeah, but they're starting to do that for the yogurt too.
Oh, see, no, I haven't seen
brands.
that. I haven't
so
seen that.
So if the packaging is mostly green, that's 0%. So that's...
Right.
Yeah. And then if the packaging is mostly light blue...
It's half.
That's half. That's what you... consider 2%.
Right.
And then if the packaging is red, it's usually full fat.
It's full fat.
And we even have yogurt where they add cream to it.
Yes, that's right. That's a new invention the last couple of years.
Yes. So when you eat those, they are so flavorful and wonderful. And
you
then
can tell she likes cream.
And then you look at the packet and you're like, oh, this was 200 calories in this tiny yogurt.
Yeah.
Because, so a regular yogurt should be around... 70 to 90 calories.
That's right.
If it's much above that, then you're getting the good stuff, and you don't want to do that every day.
It's not the good stuff. No, there really is, but there are so many different brands, and there are so many different kinds to try.
Yeah.
And really, it's not just yogurt. There's this range of various kinds of dairy products beyond cheese. We'll talk about cheese in a minute, but it's a whole category. Now, this is why, because in France, you do not have a meal without dairy. Okay,
pretty much.
You don't have a lunch or dinner usually without something that is dairy. So even if it's a yogurt or it's a piece of cheese.
Yeah.
And
but
I know
on the other hand, we don't add cheese to every good that we bake. If you look at American recipes, they usually call for cheese inside of the recipe. But you don't eat a cheese platter at the end of the meal, but you have all your cheese in the casserole or in the enchiladas or in the, I don't know, tacos or whatever you're going to be eating.
Well, in Mexican food, yes, but I guess you and I don't eat the same way.
No, we don't.
We really don't. And of course, I think that cheeses in the States are... I'm not saying that there isn't cheese in the States, but it is not an essential part of people's diet.
Right.
It really is not. So dairy products, cheese, are very important. Of course, everybody buys bread. Now, you and I both are typical because we buy fresh bread.
Yeah.
And even if there is some packaged bread in the house that's kept in the freezer just in case.
Yes, which I do.
Which I do too. Or I will buy some kind of, now you can get little kind of rolls that you can get even frozen. You can keep some extra in the freezer just in case. Mm-hmm. But basically, everyone in France still has the same idea, which is bread is something that should be fresh. It's not under plastic.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
And of course, bakeries make wonderful bread.
Mm-hmm. And they're all different.
And they're all different. And you have to, now you go nuts over the cream. I go crazy over the bread.
Oh, I love the bread too. That's my problem. I love everything.
I will eat the bread dry. I mean, I won't even worry about putting anything
Obviously,
on it.
you eat biscuit in the morning.
I eat biscuit in the morning.
Poor thing.
Oh, God, no. I have the most wonderful breads. I mean, bread is wonderful. So, and then, of course, salads, vegetables, meat. Now, what are the meats that most people eat in France? Well, the meat that is eaten the most in France is pork. Mm-hmm. Both in dried form, the equivalent of what in States would be called delicatessen, which is salamis, hams, pâtés, and things like that, but also pork,
yep.
Chops, roast, and things like that. Mm-hmm. Then you have poultry, you have chicken. In the Southwest, in a minute, I'll talk a little bit about regions, but of course in the Southwest, which is where we are, it's duck. It's very important as a part of the basic diet.
Even the dog has a duck toy at my house.
Oh. Does he eat foie gras too?
No.
And beef, interestingly enough, which is not eaten as much as pork, is good, but we'll talk about the quality of the meat. And then
I have something to say about that.
The meat that is the least eaten in terms of quantity, that is probably the best and is also the most expensive, is lamb. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it is usually there are 2-3 regions of France that have sheep, but basically that's the order in terms of the frequency of which meats are eaten. And of course, people in France tend to eat a fair amount of fish, not seafood too much, except along the coast, but fish. And fish is not fried. In France, fish is not fried. Fish
usually baked.
It's usually baked. Yeah. And you have, of course, the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, so you have access to a fair amount of fish. And even if you live in a city inland, the big supermarkets tend to have a small fresh fish section. Yeah. And you can buy flash frozen fish, which tends to be pretty good too. Mm-hmm. And if you have to worry about it.
The whole movement of what sorts of fish you shouldn't eat because these are endangered species, whatever. It's pretty recent in France. It's barely making a dent. French people are still eating a lot of fish, even endangered fish.
That's right, unfortunately.
It doesn't even register. It doesn't come on the radar. I've heard a few mentions of that as a problem on newscasts kind of things.
That's right.
But French people are pretty deaf to that. If they want to eat it, they want to eat it,
Well, of course, that's also, and that's another, maybe we really need to do that as a podcast, the whole question of France and the European community, because you have rules within each country, and then now it's very important for the countries to all adhere to the same rules created by the European community. So you have, for instance, countries that fished in the Mediterranean, and then countries in Northern Europe, and they have a very different attitude towards the fact that, for instance, you're not supposed to have too much tuna taken out of the Mediterranean anymore because it is in danger. And, these are political issues as as economic ones. Yeah. But you're right. It's just becoming part of the consciousness in France in terms of quotas, in terms of consuming certain products. But what is very important in France and is gaining even more importance is the idea of eating things that are organic.
Organic and locally grown.
And locally grown.
But locally has always been an important part of how we eat in France.
Except that it isn't anymore. And one of the ways one of the things I actually appreciate in France in terms of when you go into a supermarket, which I was trying to find in the States, and it's not that easy to find, is that when you go into any supermarket in France, the law is that you must be able to notice with a sign, the country of origin of every food that is a fresh food, whether it's meat, cheese, fruits, or vegetables.
Yeah.
You know where it comes from. So, in fact, it allows you to make a choice, which, of course, I think is very important because...
It's how we classify foods. We classify wines that way. We classify cheeses that way.
That's right.
Even for fruit and vegetables, they do tell you where they're from.
And that means that if you, in my case, for instance, I have made a decision that I don't want to buy fruits and vegetables from halfway around the planet because I don't feel that it's necessary and I don't think it's good for the environment.
Yeah, I try to avoid that as well.
So, for instance, there are times of the years for peaches and there are times for pears, and they're not the same time of the year.
Oh, yeah. That's really important. You don't find the same fruits and vegetables year-round in France because it's seasonal.
It's seasonal.
In the U.S., I mean, you find like strawberries year-round.
Year-round.
In France, right now, it's spring.
Yes,
we're in
it's
strawberry
season.
Yeah, and we get a lot of different varieties of strawberries, a lot of different prices, a lot of different everything. And that's lovely, but it's only spring by the end. Well, you have some strawberries again
in September,
but it's only seasonal.
It's seasonal,
and like you will find the plums in season. You will find the apricots in season
and peaches.
Peaches, all of these fruit, especially, is really in season. French people don't buy fruit out of season, except for bananas that you find year round because they're imported.
Pineapples, because they're imported from Africa.
Yeah,
but you're absolutely right, and it is, of course, and even to the extent that one of the few things that has become something available all year round, and that both you and I are a little bit guilty of, is buying tomatoes in the middle of the winter time.
Yeah.
And in fact, of course, they should not be bought. And most traditional-minded French people will tell you, as my husband does, do not buy a tomato in the wintertime because it doesn't come from here. It comes from someplace far away.
Well, they
it's
have
a hot
houses,
house, and it's not very good. I mean, basically,
it's
not
true.
very good. So there is still this notion that in the winter you eat certain things, in the spring you eat certain things, in the summer you eat certain things, and people wait with pleasure for certain things, particularly when it comes to certain vegetables like asparagus, which is a spring vegetable, or certain fruits that come out at certain times of the year.
Yeah.
They look forward to it. So if you have something all the time, all year, you don't care one way or the other.
It undervalues it, yeah.
It undervalues it, and really you don't understand what things taste like when they are truly in season. And I think one of the first things, I'm a huge fruit eater. And I'm not a vegetarian at all. But I think fruit is what I love more than everything else. And one of the first things that convinced me I had to live in France was the quality of the fruit and what it tastes like. Because you will never taste peaches like you get in France. And
it's true, they're good.
You will never taste various fruits that way.
Although in the Western U.S., if it's locally grown, it's so hot. The peaches are wonderful, and the cantaloupes are also.
Well, the cantaloupes from California.
There are a few fruits and vegetables that I find superior in season in the U.S.
Oh, well, I don't. I mean, I never have, except for berries, and that is because in the northwest of the United States, there is a huge production of berries, and so I find that really fabulous because here, berries, except for strawberries, are very expensive and very hard to find, and usually are not grown locally at all.
Yeah.
But even though there is a growing movement in the United States for local food, I grew up on the East Coast, on the Northeast. We had local tomatoes and corn in the summer. They're still delicious because they were the roadside stands that would grow things, the farmers' stands, right?
Yeah.
Those are wonderful. But there is this general phenomenon, and it is taking hold here in France too, which is that you can go to a supermarket and find packaged fruits and vegetables that come from very far away that are not necessarily in season. But I'm not talking about those because I'm as guilty as anybody else occasionally of going, oh gosh, I would really like to have that, even though I know it's not the right time of the year. I just can't stand the idea of not having it. But I think that there is First of all, I think that there's one thing that is very important to talk about, and that is that even though there are pesticides used in France, the amount of chemicals used on fruits and vegetables and the amount of chemicals used in raising animals is not the same as in the United States. And I think this is really, really important. For instance, it is a fact that people from the States, and I think this would be true of people from Australia and even Argentina, they will tell you that the beef in France is not very good.
It's nasty.
Well, it's not nasty. It's not nasty. It's that you have to know what cut to get. But the reason why it is not as melt in your mouth as beef in the States is because it has no hormones in it, and it is forbidden by law for beef and any four-legged animal to have hormones. So what you get, Americans are fed hormone-filled animals. First of all, I am sure, this is not my field, obviously, biochemistry, but I am sure that I will be vindicated in the future that one of the reasons that there are so many people in the States that have weight problems is because they have lived through at least 2 or 3 generations of people who are fed from birth on animal products that have growth hormone in them.
Yeah, that's possible. I don't
and I think that it really does
opinion.
affect your metabolism in some way.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are forbidden in the production of animals in Europe that are not forbidden in the US. But what happens is, so recently I went through a phase where I wanted to eat vegetarian. And before I got to that, I thought, well, maybe I could just eat locally grown organic beef, for instance. And we have an acquaintance she raises cattle for butchering, and it's all the cows are outside.
Right.
They're not given antibiotics unless they have to because they're sick, but they're not giving supplements of antibiotics or hormones systematically. Yeah. It's bio, which here it means organic.
Right.
And we bought some products from her knowing that they would be better quality, but the flavor I didn't like at all. It had this rangy...
Well, it's gamey.
Yeah, gamey kind of...
Right.
And so I decided, okay, I don't enjoy the flavor. I'm not going to eat beef at all. That way, problem solved. So for a few months, I ate vegetarian. That became a problem with family because my husband and daughter enjoy meat. So I've kind of reverted back a little bit.
There are places and there are cuts of meat you can get that are good. They are not as fatty. This is one of the biggest differences.
Yeah.
You will not get fatty meat. And of course, in the States, what we call marbled meat is what makes it very, very tender. So I'm the first one to admit that it is more tender if you get beef in the United States. Now, the lamb in France is out of this world. It's very expensive. It is now popular, and you and I both know that, for people to buy lamb from New Zealand, which you can even get fresh in the supermarkets. You don't even have to get it frozen. The markets get away with that because there isn't that much lamb. So the lamb that is actually from France gets sold anyway because there is a whole market. There's a public out there for high-end meat, and they will buy all of that. The pork is something else. Pork and chicken, there is a real problem in France, just like in the States, with enormous batteries of these humongous farms where these animals are kept in tiny pens in horrific conditions where they never go outside, they never walk outside. Because France, like every other country, has people who are richer and people who are poorer, you know very well that if your choice is between eating meat at all and not eating it, you will buy the least expensive meat, and that means you probably are getting this kind of meat.
Right.
When you have the opportunity and the option, as you and I do, I, for instance, will only buy free-range chicken. A lot of people don't even realize that the chickens that they buy are not. But there's a limit to what I will accept in terms of eating, even though I really like meat. I don't want to be a vegetarian, at least not at this point.
Yeah.
And fish, of course, you have the same issues in France, perhaps even more so, actually, than in the States, because I don't think this United States is so big. There really are parts of the country where you don't have access to a lot of fresh fish. You have a lot of frozen fish. But here, of course, because we have a huge coastline, because you have Italy, Spain, and the northern countries very close by, you have a lot of fresh fish, and yet a lot of it is farmed. For people in France, food is very important.
Yeah.
And so all of these questions become really important questions for them, much more so than in the States, where very few people really pay attention that much
we do
to
pay
this kind of
attention
thing.
to that, yeah.
We pay much more attention. So, of course, as I mentioned and we agreed on before, everybody here buys fresh bread all the time. It's really very much a staple of people's diets.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, there's wine. Now, of course, things have changed a lot. And in the past, I think that was really part of the cliche of what people eat and drink in France. And I think a lot of young people really don't drink wine very much. People still drink wine for special occasions, but I think it's us adults that tend to still enjoy a glass of wine with meal in the evenings. But I find that a lot of young people, they don't drink wine very much.
Well, I didn't either when I was young.
You didn't when you were young?
No.
Of course, the influence of sodas has changed some of their...
I didn't drink sodas either. I do
You didn't
now,
do?
but yeah.
Did you drink water? Did you just drink bubbly
drank
water? Yeah.
Not even bubbly.
No,
Just-
not even bubbly.
I like flat water.
I think most people here, for instance, if you don't drink wine with a meal, you tend to drink water.
Yeah.
And people don't drink milk or juice or things like that with a meal.
Right, but no, never.
Never.
No milk or juice with a
No,
meal.
ever.
I mean, if you're 5 years old, you might get away with it, but that's it.
Right. And I think that, milk is considered to be something you use for cooking as an adult, but you give it to children to drink. But as an adult, most people don't drink milk
Correct.
as such in France. And so, of course, wine, it depends on your taste in wine and by the region. But what happens if you are vegetarian?
Yeah.
Okay. You and I are both people who, you made an attempt to go vegetarian for a while in the house. Vegetarian, not as opposed to being vegan. Okay. Vegetarian meaning you still eat dairy products and you still may eat eggs. And then, of course, everybody has a different definition of what being vegetarian is. Someone who eats fish is not really a vegetarian because it's an animal. But whatever, let's say, and I have had some people come to visit who say, I'm vegetarian. And I'll ask them, the first thing I will ask them is, will you eat dairy products and eggs? Because it makes life a lot easier in France. The French basically are not people who are very vegetarian.
Nope.
They have a very balanced diet that includes lots of animal products.
But we don't eat mass quantities of meat.
No.
But there is meat in a lot of things.
But there's meat in a lot of things, and there certainly are dairy products, which are animal products.
Yes.
If you go to someone's house, or if you go to a restaurant, and you don't want to eat meat or fish, they will offer you something that has some kind of dairy in it because they assume that you will want some of that, whether it is dairy or eggs or whatever. So, for instance, people will make quiche in their home. They make salads. They make gratin of vegetables, which means, of course, you have a kind of white sauce and then some grated cheese up on top. But it's very difficult for a lot of people in France to really understand being a vegetarian.
Yeah.
It is, you have to be able to feel comfortable to say to somebody, I don't eat fish and meat. Which reminds me, because it's a little bit similar, but not quite. I once knew someone who didn't drink anything alcoholic at all, and not a drop. I mean, he didn't drink beer, he didn't drink wine, he didn't drink anything. And we were invited over to someone's house, and I had said to them, he doesn't drink anything alcoholic. And they served us wine.
Yeah.
And I said, I was a little bit embarrassed, and I said, he's not going to say anything to you, but he won't drink the wine. Right. And I remember them looking at me and they said to me, well, you said he doesn't drink alcohol. And I thought, I made a mistake with the word in French and the word in English, because in French, that would mean someone who doesn't drink anything strong, like whiskeys or things like that. Yeah. And they looked at me and they said, well, wine's not alcohol.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, it really is, So, and that I think is part of the problem with being vegetarian in France is that people will say to you, "Oh, you're vegetarian. Okay, I won't give you beef, but I'll give you this, 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 and this."
Yeah.
So it's not unheard of. And now more people are trying to cut back a little bit on their consumption of fish and meat. But it is definitely not something that is very common. And that, of course, is even true in restaurants. Now, if you happen to be vegan, you really have a much more difficult time in France.
Yes.
It is very difficult to find people who will give you anything. If you go to someone's home, you would maybe get a salad. You might get pasta, but then again, they would have to remember to not put any cream or grated cheese or anything on it. It is really, there is a very small population in France that is vegetarian. I would say that is infinitely small, the population in France that is vegan.
Oh yeah, it's very, very small. It's a problem actually. I think French people are very set in their ways. And French people, honestly, I think we have a problem because we do not want... It's good and it's bad at the same time. French people don't want to try new things. They know what foods they like, and they don't try ethnic foods.
A lot, they don't. That's
right.
True.
So you don't see a thriving... except in like the very large cities where there's... thousands of people walking past every day. You might find an ethnic restaurant there. But in smaller cities, there isn't a one. You might have maybe North African cuisine because we have a large population of North Africans in France. But that's it. So it's because French people are very set in their ways when it comes to food.
When it comes to food,
and
absolutely.
they don't want to try anything new. And they definitely don't want to try not eating meat for the most part. And not eating dairy is like, whoa, far out, you must be crazy, you know?
Yeah.
So that's, unfortunately, and I want to apologize on behalf of French people. We shouldn't be like that. I think it's a flaw in our culture that we are like that, but it's a fact.
You know, I obviously, on some level, we could say it's a flaw. It also has to do, I think, and this is, of course, me thinking about this coming from the outside and adapting to the way people eat here. I think it's because it is one of the things that creates national pride in France is the food and the recipes. And it's a culture going back very, very far that is really based on hunting and animal products.
Right.
And because France, as part of Western Europe, I think has always had the privilege, even as far back as the Romans 2,000 years ago, of being a rich land. There's always been enough animal for everybody to have some protein.
Right.
And I think that maybe what happens is that you're right. It's because people don't want to try new things.
So we shouldn't be so narrow-minded. I mean, what do we care if somebody doesn't want to eat meat?
Well, I'm not sure, and I'm not even sure whether people care in the sense that I'm not sure how much they make a
argue
judgment.
with you. I tried being.
Oh, really?
I'll try not eating meat, and they will. Like, what? What do you mean you don't eat meat?
What do you mean you don't eat meat?
Yeah, so the attitudes are, a little bit narrow-minded, quite a bit narrow-minded.
You think they're narrow-minded?
When it comes to food, they just don't want to consider that it's none of their business what I put in my mouth.
Right.
The French people are very happy to tell you what's good for you.
Well, that's true.
They're extremely happy to tell you what's good for you.
That's true.
They'll tell you, they'll tell me, you're a little plump, you shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't eat that. I'm like, it's none of your business.
Well, that's interesting because I've never heard that kind of comment, but I have to tell you, I think I mentioned a while ago to you the story about me and celery. I mean, I went to an open air market. This is about a month ago, and I decided I wanted to get some celery and a bunch of other vegetables. I was going to make myself a huge, huge pot of vegetable soup, and I love celery, and it's of course a vegetable that has a very strong taste. But, I grew up in the States and you buy a big head of celery and
sure.
Sometimes you eat it raw and sometimes you chop up a lot and whatever. And I went to this market and I made a mistake and I didn't see that she was selling what she called celery hearts. And when I went to pay for it, she gave me a price that was outlandish. It was like €3 or €4. And I went, wait, this is 2 little sticks of celery. I mean, whoa, what's going on? So I get into this conversation with her, and she was a little bit snotty, I have to admit. And I said, but I don't want the hearts of celery. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I just want a couple of branches of celery because I'm putting it in soup. And a guy, an old man, came up and started listening to the conversation. And he turned around to me and he said to me, if you're making a soup, you put in 1 stalk of celery because otherwise it's not a good soup.
Exactly.
And I said, I like celery. I want to put in a lot of celery in my soup. And the woman turned around and she looked at me and she said to me, that is not done.
Exactly. And so French people have very, very set ideas when it comes to food, which has helped us over the years in preserving our culinary traditions, which is a good thing. I mean, French people are not early adopters of anything, that has to do with food. As a matter of fact, American products is very interesting to me because I see American big companies that make American foods trying to establish a presence in France, and they have to rebrand everything. So like Marie Callender's, in Spain, it's sold as Marie Callender's. The packaging looks the same as it does in the US. The branding looks the same, everything else. Here you find something called Marie, and it's totally Marie Callender's because it's the same logo. I mean, it's the same
thing.
A lot of things are the same, but it's the colors are different. It's just the font that is the same. So I went looking, and this Marie brand is totally Marie Callender's.
It is the same.
It's just that they have to repackage things for France because they know that French people will not accept foreign-looking foods.
Or they're put in what they call the exotic food section.
Right. So honestly, I think that's a problem. And if you're coming to France, you need to be aware of it, that people are not that open-minded about food.
They're not. And quite honestly, if you go to big restaurants, it's very easy. If you're a basic vegetarian, to get nice big salads, you can get basic pasta. But it is not easy in France to be a vegan.
So I worked for a company for a while where a couple of Indians came and they spent a whole month in France helping us out with something. And we were staying at the same hotel because I was also a consultant. And at that hotel, the waiters knew that all they ate was French fries because they didn't like anything else. So the company tried to take them out to an Indian restaurant nearby, and there aren't that many.
No.
And they didn't like that Indian restaurant for some reason. It was not to their standard or whatever. And so they just went back to the hotel, the restaurant in the hotel. And every lunch and dinner, they ate French fries. French fries all the time.
That's kind of sad.
It's really bad. It's bad for you. But I mean, it was just a month. So
right.
But you don't have to go to that extreme.
No.
But you're going to have to get a little bit creative if you're a vegetarian, and especially if you're a vegan. Now, of course, there's a difference between being invited to someone's home, the way French people eat and live at home, and if you, by the way, come and rent a studio or an apartment where you have a kitchen, because then you obviously can go out and buy all the ingredients you want and do whatever you want. Yeah. And luckily, fruits and vegetables are abundant everywhere. The other thing that you have to be a little bit careful of is that French people don't have a lot of patience with food allergies.
That's right.
So they consider that if you approach them saying, I have a peanut allergy, for instance, in the back of their minds, they're thinking it's hogwash because they don't know anybody with a peanut allergy. Mm-hmm. And it's true that a lot of these allergies seem to be coming in like waves. Right now, it's the gluten thing. Ton of people all of a sudden are gluten intolerant. A few years ago, it was the peanuts. And, and French people are really like, what?
Yeah.
So if you have a problem that will require medical attention, should you be eating peanuts or wheat or whatever, insist really, really heavily in restaurants, because they might think that you couldn't be serious. I'm not saying every restaurant is like that. I'm just saying it's possible.
It is possible. And it's the same thing if you were invited to someone's house. In the States, I think we have a tendency now, which is very nice, to ask people if there are things they cannot eat.
Right.
That is not usually...
No,
sometimes. It sometimes happens. I have a couple of people who've asked me that. But most
I
of
ask
the time...
people that usually.
Most of the time, people don't. They just assume you will eat everything. Now, there are a few things that I don't eat, but because if I get invited to somebody's house and it's someone I consider a friend, I will simply warn them ahead of time. But sometimes that doesn't happen, and it's very upsetting because you don't really know what to do. You don't want to insult people, and if you can't eat it, you can't eat it. And of course, there's a difference between having an intolerance and being truly allergic to something. Anyway,
exactly. If it's just going to give you gas, I mean, okay,
right?
That's not the same as I'm going to choke.
Right, exactly. You're not going to be taken to the emergency room of the hospital. Another thing, which of course has changed for the better, thankfully, is smoking in relation to food. Okay.
Yes.
Now we really aren't. I don't want to talk necessarily about smoking as such because that's another whole thing. But it is now true that restaurants are required to make themselves non-smoking, even though outside on the terraces you can still smoke in most restaurants.
Yes.
But if you're invited to someone's home, you need to know that unless you know ahead of time that it's a person or a family that is completely non-smoking, that they might, in fact, smoke and won't necessarily ask you if it bothers you or not.
Yeah, that's right.
And it is a delicate
it's
thing.
their place.
It's their place.
Yeah, they do what they want.
And I have had, unfortunately, the experience a couple of times of being invited over to someone's house and really have gotten sick because there's been too much cigarette smoke. And it's very delicate as a situation.
It's getting better, but French people still smoke more than Americans on average. And it's trending in the right direction, but very slowly.
Right.
So when you're out in public, in the restaurants, for instance, the smokers just sit on the terrace.
Right.
And so if you want to enjoy the nice weather outside,
you have to have it.
You have to put up with the smoke.
That's right.
Because that's where all the smokers
That's
sit.
right. And I think that the French, even people who don't smoke, which is, you and I are non-smokers, but I think that most French people do not have the intolerance for cigarette smoke that Americans have.
Yeah.
And it can be a real problem.
Oh, I really shocked a restaurant owner in Spain just recently. We walked in to this restaurant. It was a pizzeria that was recommended on TripAdvisor, and so we wanted to try it. We walked in, and there was an overwhelming scent of smoke in the building. Now, the building was empty. We were a bit early for Spain. There were no patrons smoking, but the smell, and it was just awful. And I just told the lady, I'm sorry, I can't eat here. The smell
it's just awful.
And she's like, but nobody's smoking. I'm like, you can't smell it, but I can. And so I was out of there. And it might I've never had that experience in France. It could happen. But know that it's been a few years since smoking was allowed inside of restaurants, so it shouldn't happen.
It shouldn't happen.
In Spain, they're still making the change. Yeah.
It shouldn't happen. But unfortunately, it is true that there's a different ethic. There's a different behavioral attitude.
Yeah, the attitude
it.
is different. Yeah.
So you need to know that. I was in this was in a restaurant in Paris with a few people, and we were in it's a very nice Italian restaurant, and we were inside, but we were close to a window, and this was in the summertime, and this was a restaurant like there are a lot in France that was not air conditioned, so the window was open, and there were people sitting outside smoking, and the smoke was going inside.
Yep.
And
if it bothers you, that's a problem.
Quite honestly, I am not someone who appreciates a lot of cigarette smoke, but I have lived here a long time, and having one person smoke a cigarette, I don't always realize that I smell it. And the people I was with, I mean, they were just, it was like, we have to close the window. And so we wound up having this terrible scene because one of them got up to close the window, and two other people who were sitting nearby said, "No, it's too hot in here with the window closed." And they opened up the window, and I thought, this is a real moment of cultural dissension. You really don't know what to do in a situation like that.
Yeah, there's no good answer.
There's no good answer, and unfortunately, in people's homes, it still hasn't gotten to this point where everyone says, "No, if you smoke, you have to go outside." So you should be aware of that.
Okay,
if
you come to my house, you will smoke outside.
You will smoke outside, right? I know that. So. Obviously, there are things that are changing. Young people open up places that are restaurants that tend to be more trendy and much more Americanized in a lot of ways. It's become much more popular for big sandwiches and salads, even at lunchtime.
Well, there's something we didn't mention. We mentioned dietary restrictions. If you eat halal, no problem in France.
Right.
It's all over.
Okay. Halal is the equivalent of kosher for meat.
Yeah.
It's not for other things. But now somebody out there is going to react to my saying this. But basically, in fact, for the killing of the meat, if you eat only kosher meat, it is killed the same way as what is called halal.
Right, but it's not the same priest who does the prayers.
It's not the same person who does the prayers.
Yeah.
But in fact, it is killed the same way.
Yeah.
So it is very difficult in France, almost impossible, unless you go to a specialized store to get kosher food. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really exist. Yeah. Sometimes major big supermarkets will have a small kosher section.
Right.
Halal, which is, of course, the way the term used for meat that's cooked, that's killed if you're Muslim. Some supermarkets have some of it, but there are lots more butchers that have it.
Oh, yeah. The halal you can find easily
right.
in France. Kosher, not so much. So be aware of that.
Be aware. And then one just last thing, which of course is kind of has to do with almost like a joke. People in France, even though they are thinner, they also have cholesterol. And probably one of the reasons they do is because they eat so much dairy.
Yeah.
And they do eat, of course, a lot of meat. But it doesn't mean that unlike in the States where you will look at any kind of packaged food and it will be in big letters, whether it's low cholesterol or good for your cholesterol or whatever. Yeah. It isn't always noticeable in France on the foods. I mean, there are certain margarines that are designed specifically for people who have cholesterol problems, and they will say that. Packaged foods, whatever they are, you have to look on the back in the small section where it has all of the different things, carbs and sugar and blah, 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 to see whether it says cholesterol. But interestingly enough, it is not something that jumps out at you if you are worried about cholesterol in terms of eating foods in France.
Yeah, you have to, the packaging will say grams of fat, grams of saturated fats, all of that. If you care, you can find out.
Now, let's just briefly, because we're going to have to do another one that talks about special dishes and all of that. I thought we could just mention that even though, like in lots of other places in the world, things are becoming generalized because of transportation. And of course, so you can find the same kinds of foods pretty much anywhere. France is still, for a country its size, a place where you have regions that have specific dishes attached to them.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, instead of just talking about specific recipes, I just thought to give people an idea that you could kind of divide France up into, this is not anything official or administrative in any way. You have basically the north of France, which is the area of what I call north of Paris. Mm-hmm. You have the Mediterranean area, you have the Atlantic coastal area, you have the mountain areas, and then you have various different sections in the center of the country. But interestingly enough, there really are some very distinct differences in the preferences of the food in those areas. So just as a way of giving everybody a foretaste of a broadcast that's really specifically about specific dishes and what's in them and everything else, just so that people get an idea. Because it's interesting. It's a little bit like in Italy, interestingly enough. In the north of France, the basic liquid is beer, not wine.
Yeah.
And the food is hearty. food. And that is, of course, because in the north of France, it's much, much colder. So you have the kind of food that you would associate with that kind of a climate. So you have lots of stews. You have lots of things that are even stews that are cooked with beer. Beer is people drink beer everywhere in France, but they really, really love beer in the north of France. If you go to the Mediterranean region of France, which is basically the southeast, you have what is basically considered to be Provençal cooking, which is based on olive oil as opposed to butter and cream, which is, again, a northern thing. You have herbs, garlic, tomatoes, olive oil, and much more lighter wine. You'll have a lot of wine, rosé wines and things like that. That are really, even though, again, these are things that people will make even at home in different places, but they're really associated with these areas.
Yes.
If you go to the coast, particularly the Atlantic coast, that is where you have lots of seafood. You have oysters and mussels they're grown, cultivated along the coast. And so that is where you find lots and lots and lots of them. And for people who love that kind of seafood, that is where you go. If you go out to Brittany, which is the furthermost western section of France, which is the closest to England.
Saint-Doux.
You have butter, 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 cream, 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 butter, 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 and cream, cream, cream.
And saindoux, which is like
and saindoux?
Saindoux is
which is pork fat. Right.
They add that to everything.
Well, they also eat a lot of pork, but it is a region where if you are not into eating things with lots of butter and cream and milk and dairy products, that it's rich. It's very rich.
Yeah.
Their diet historically was one that was not very rich in a variety of foods. It's not an area that grows enormous numbers of wonderful fruits and vegetables, and it's really based on these things. And so if you go there for a few days, it's delightful, but just watch out. The third day, you will realize you've just gained 10 pounds, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, if you go up a little bit from Brittany to Normandy, which is the region basically right next to it, it's apples, 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 and apples, which makes me a little bit happier. And it's also the region of Camembert and milk that comes from cows. These are cow regions. The grasses, the meadows are wonderful. It's really the region of crepes and of apple cider and apples, everything you can do with apples.
And it's very nice.
And it's very, very lovely. If you go to the mountains, now in France, you have two major areas of mountains. You have the Alps, which run north and south, basically. And then, of course, the Pyrenees, which cut across east and west, separating France from Spain. I guess it's very typical in general, probably it's true everywhere in the world, I don't know, that people who are mountain people tend to like hearty food.
Yeah.
What is true and typical is that in the Alps, where people had to live in areas where in the winter there was nothing fresh, they managed over, I guess, centuries to develop certain techniques. So it is one of the regions where they developed a technique for making a lot of dried meat. And they have a lot of very hard cheeses that are cheeses that store for a very long time. So things that some people know about even in the States, like fondue, cheese fondue, those come from the Alps. You have, basically, there are several dishes that are made with cheese, potatoes, and dried meats that are basically the basic sustenance of these regions in the winter that are now very fashionable to have, very fashionable to serve to people. And these are areas that really where these kinds of dishes come from. And in the Pyrenees, interestingly enough, a lot of sheep. So a lot of cheese that's made from sheep, a lot of lamb, and a lot of really good kind of soupy stew type things. One of them, which I love, called garbure, which is really good.
Never had that.
You never had that?
No.
Oh, it's really, really good. You can even make it without meat. You can do it with just a whole bunch of vegetables. We'll talk about that another day.
Yeah.
Now,
we didn't spend very much time talking about cheeses, but that is such a big subject. We're going to
do a separate. We're going to do a cheese thing. Except that it turns out, just as a couple of things, and I was thinking, what we should do is, wouldn't it be fun if we start a kind of trivia quiz with our listeners?
Oh yes.
So that each broadcast, there's one thing that we ask them again at some future point and see who really pays attention to the podcast. I was thinking of a couple from the one about Eiffel Tower already, or Versailles. And so here's an interesting one. the cheeses, I used to think that cheese was a relatively recent thing in France. Well, not at all.
Yeah, it's
and in
old.
fact,
Yeah.
it's very, very old.
Yeah.
And the Romans were already people who ate a lot of cheese when they came here. But the Gauls, the Celtics, the tribes that were here, they had what apparently was something more like a cottage cheese kind of thing that they ate. But this is the one that I love best. And of course, you'll appreciate this because of what we both know we both like in cheeses. One of the cheeses that is the oldest in France is Comté.
Oh, love Comté.
Isn't Comté wonderful?
I love
And
it.
Comté is a mountain cheese,
Yep.
which comes from the Jura, which is basically connected to the Alps. Geologists and geographic people out there, forgive me for being so gross about that, but that's basically where the Jura, the region of the Jura is. And it's a cheese that goes back a couple of thousand years. And it's obviously because it's a cheese that is a hard pressed cheese in a wheel, that is a cheese that will conserve, it will be you can keep for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So they've actually, I think this is hysterical though, they've actually found the crusts of pieces of Comté that go back to Roman times.
Oh, wow.
You know? It's like, I mean, I know your dog likes the crust of cheese,
Yes,
but I
my
would
dog.
not give her one of those.
No.
But we do have to do a whole conversation about cheese.
Yes.
And I know that a lot of Americans, when they hear cheese, they think cholesterol. But of course, cheese, it turns out, is basically something that is very, very good for you.
Yeah, if you don't eat too much of it. I mean, you don't want to eat buckets of it.
You don't want to eat buckets of it, but you don't want to eat buckets of anything.
That's right.
No.
French people love to eat, but the thing is, we don't eat that much. The portions are, reasonable.
Reasonable.
So
a
we
portion
eat
of
all
meat.
sorts of things,
Right.
but a portion of meat is going to be 110 grams. So what's that?
It's
2-3 ounces?
110 to 150 grams is basically about 3 ounces.
Yeah.
So we're talking much smaller portions.
Right. But of course, we tend to have that at least once a day. Many people will even have that twice a day. But it's never in huge quantities.
No.
Same with the cheese. We eat it at many meals, not every meal necessarily, but many meals. But it's not huge quantities.
It's not huge quantities. Now, I just wanted to finish with just the whole question of cliches about foods in France.
Ah, yes.
Okay. So I have people still, when I go back to the States, who ask me, how often do I eat frog's legs?
Oh, never.
Never. Okay? You and I, the answer is never. How many people do you know who eat frog's legs?
None.
None. My guess is that there's about 5% of the population in France that eat frog's legs. I have eaten frog's legs once in my life in a restaurant in New York City. And that was a long time ago. It was when I was a student and I was invited by some rich guy out for dinner, and I was trying to be very sophisticated. And so I thought, it's a French restaurant. This is what you're supposed to order.
Yeah.
And I would never in my life eat them again.
Yeah.
Snails.
Oh, no.
Now, snails, interestingly enough,
Some people eat them.
some people eat them. And the region of Burgundy is a region where people have snails a lot. And you can find snails in restaurants in Paris.
That's Champagne region.
And Champagne region. But the snails, to be fair, snails that people eat tend to be snails that are raised. They're not, just like go out in your garden and pick up some snails.
Oh, but there are people who do that.
Do they do that?
On occasion, around here, I live in the country. On occasion, I see people picking up snails.
God.
I feel bad for the snails.
Yeah, I
is
feel
the
bad
truth.
for the snails. But it is true that in proportion, there are more people that do eat snails than certainly that eat frog's legs. And snails tend to be they're cleaned up so that when people eat them, they've been taken care of. I don't know if we want to go into that, but
No, it's nasty.
But it's nasty. But anyway, and then something that creates a great controversy, and even to this minute, foie gras.
Ah, yes.
Okay. Foie gras. Now, for people who don't know what that is, of course, that is the liver of ducks or geese that has been force-fed at the end of its life with grain, sometimes with figs, but mostly with corn, so that it's very big. It gets fatty.
Fatty liver disease.
It has what is called fatty liver disease. And the reality is that in a good part of southern France, it is a staple of people's food in the winter time, because that is usually when it's produced, and it's a festive food. People serve it for special holidays. Now, it's a very controversial food. So I know in the States, I think it's California, they've just forbidden the importation
of cities.
Foie gras.
Yeah.
There are some places in Europe that are starting to forbid it as well. There are lots of people, I know lots of people who eat it. I know people who make it.
I have made it.
I eat it, but I don't eat a huge amount of it. But it's not something I refuse to eat.
Right. I think I'm very ambivalent about that. I really love foie gras, especially the ones I make, because I pick my ingredients really well and I make it in a way that is pleasing to me. But I'm to the point where it's a Christmas and New Year's food. I don't buy it or serve it the rest of the year. And that way, it's like a special food for a special occasion, not something to be had. I mean, we used to have it, maybe a couple times a month before.
Really? Yeah.
And I can't really justify that anymore. So I'm changing my ways a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very complicated subject, and I'm not even sure. I agree with you. I'm not even sure how I feel about it anymore.
Yeah.
It is not something I will refuse to eat. But this year, for instance, I didn't buy any at all, and I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it anymore.
Yeah. But it tastes so good.
But it tastes very good.
That's
if you like that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the other things that I find are associated a little bit with France, but that are less controversial, like oysters.
Yeah.
Which
we eat raw on the shell.
Which of course everybody in France eats raw on the shell.
I mean, you can find them cooked, but it's not very good.
It's not very good here. It's it's something that in certain parts of the States you will find fried oysters or things like that.
And they do keep a very close eye on the oysters as far as sanitary conditions.
Yes.
And there are the health department really watches it because they know that since it's eaten raw, it might spread disease.
Right. They're very, very, very careful. The Food and Drug Administration here, whatever you want to call it, the Department of Agriculture, is very careful. As soon as there's they measure the levels of different bacteria every week. It's very well surveyed. And of course, if you like oysters, it's something that people just find wonderful here.
Although we wouldn't eat oysters. Okay, this is funny. We don't eat oysters traditionally in the month of the year that do not have an R in them.
Yes.
So July and August, you typically don't eat oysters. June, you don't either. You start again in September. May, June, July, August, you wouldn't eat oysters. It's not the season.
It's not the season. But, when I go up to Brittany sometimes in August, in the summertime, the outdoor food markets will have fishmongers. And they do sometimes have them because they also have mussels. Personally, I don't eat oysters, okay? Mm-hmm. That's just one of those things. I just don't like them. So I don't worry about it one way or the other. But obviously, there are people who wait with their eyes gleaming for the months that you can get your oysters because they really, really do love them.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, you're one of them. I didn't know that about you, Annie.
Yeah.
And then just one last thing before we sort of close this chapter on food.
This long discussion on food, by the way. You might have to pause us a couple of times to get through it.
I hope everybody's hungry right now. I hope really this is what I want everybody to do is run to the refrigerator after you're done. Just vaguely mention this because it's also a subject of discussion. And that is that when people come from the States and they want to eat cheese, they will very often ask me if the cheese is made with raw milk. Now, in France, there are still lots of cheeses made with raw milk. Nobody that I know of has ever gotten sick from eating a cheese with raw milk.
Correct.
It gives it a certain taste. It develops a certain flavor with the fact that the milk is raw. So I think that, again, when we were talking earlier about attitudes and prejudices that the French have towards changes, my suggestion to people coming to France, unless you have a very strong allergy, is to try these things.
Yeah, and at the grocery store, you'll see it says lait cru.
Lait cru, yes, C-R-U, yes, right.
And that means that it's made with raw milk.
With raw milk.
Not all French cheeses are made that way, obviously.
No.
And of the same type of cheese, you will find it made with lait cru and made with pasteurized milk.
That's right, like a camembert.
Right. There's different ways of producing it, so you can choose,
You can choose.
Usually the lait cru is more expensive because the sanitary, they have to, the way they harvest the milk, they have to be really, really careful. They wash the cows really well. They do all sorts of things to keep it clean. So it's more expensive. Usually.
It's a little bit more expensive. It's worth it if you have the opportunity to go, even if you're just visiting and you don't have access to a full kitchen or anything else, but if you have access to a real cheese store, to ask for tiny little amounts of 2 or 3 different ones and try one that's with raw milk just to see.
Yeah.
It's usually very good for the taste, but I know that Americans are hesitant to taste anything that says raw milk.
Yeah. It's not customary in France to ask for a free taste of cheese at a cheese market.
No, I'm saying buying small, very
exactly,
small,
but I'm
quantities.
just
That's
making
right.
sure.
No, you're absolutely right. It's good to remind people there is very little in the way of freebie and tastings in France in general.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do is save special recipes and the whole story of cheese.
Yeah, we got to do that for
and
another
chocolate.
time. Yes. So we'll talk about all those another time. But I just want to close with this beautiful quote from Charles de Gaulle, the former president of France, who said, "How do you expect to govern a country that has over 300 cheeses? Because each French person has their own opinion about,
what's good to eat and what you should eat."
Yes, and it's perfectly acceptable in France to argue with you over what you should and shouldn't eat, which Americans find very strange.
Which very strange, and you will actually find that people, if you get invited to their house, they will tell you cannot have that now. You have to have it after, or you have to have it before.
There's a certain order that we eat things in, and we didn't even talk about apéro.
Oh,
but this is going to be another show.
Oh,
yes.
Remember, food in France, they go together.
They go together, and we could be talking about this forever. But we have to close at this time.
We have to have lunch.
Exactly. It is lunchtime, actually.
It's lunchtime.
So thank you very much for listening to us. We would love for you to share the show with your friends and family if you think it would be relevant for them. And send us some feedback. Let us know what you think. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.
Next time.
Au revoir. Bon
Au
appétit.
revoir. Bye.